We have now seen the 13th straight night of U.S. military strikes on Iran. Meanwhile, Axios is reporting the president says he's close to a decision on whether or not to launch a massive attack that would be bigger than ever before. But Iran has not shown any sign of complying with U.S. demands. Yesterday, they launched their own strikes against U.S. bases and allies across the region. Joining the group chat, Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia and an MS Now international affairs analyst. Ambassador, 13 days of consecutive strikes. Do you see any chance of diplomacy turning this around? And again, those people leading the charge in terms of diplomacy, we're talking about Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, maybe a little J.D. Vance, possibly with a sprinkle of Marco Rubio in there.
Well, of course, I certainly hope so. This war is a disaster. It needs to end. Everybody, I think, would agree that we want this war to end. The problem is I don't see a strategy that the president has devised to get to that end, let alone to put pressure on the Iranians to negotiate. And I want to emphasize, this is every single campaign, the last 13 days that you emphasized, is not about the nuclear weapons program. It's not about Iran's support for terrorism. It's not about their missile program. It's not about democracy. It's about opening the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before he started his war. So that adds insult to injury about where we're at. And I just don't see that they have a strategy. We've seen no evidence that this bombing campaign has led to any new initiative on the Iranian side to begin to negotiate.
Do you think Iran is getting more confident about playing hardball with us? They rejected a ceasefire proposal from President Trump yesterday.
Yes, they think they can withstand this. They think the president will have more pressure on him than they have on them. They know that we have midterms. They're looking at the reporting that happens every day about gas prices here, and they think time is on their side.
You know, I don't want to call the president the boy who cried wolf, because when I hear the president, make these threats of a potential massive attack, I just think, what if I was a military mom? Am I listening to this? Am I waiting by the phone? Are his words losing less and less power? It was not that long ago he said they would potentially end an entire civilization.
That term crossed my mind when I was preparing for this today. And it's, I think, to use Donald Trump's words, he doesn't have the cards in this. And so on top of that, every time there is a casualty, there is a community back home where this is on the local news, it's being discussed, and it's giving a lot of congressional Republicans the flashbacks to the 2006 era of Iraq, except back then you had a completely different geopolitical situation. And so I think there's a lot of people across the country who are saying, what was this for?
I was going to say, if you look at the history of these military activities where you make these types of threats or even act on them, Tokyo getting bombed during World War II with hundreds of thousands of casualties, it did not bring an end to the war. Dresden bombed in Germany during World War II did not bring an end to the war. So if we engage in some full-scale bombing campaign beyond what we've already seen, it is going to harden the position of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They have no intention of abandoning a hardline position. And so the only thing that brought World War II to an end in Japan was the unthinkable, and that remains unthinkable.
Given all the players in the region, in the conflict, what should the American people be bracing for?
I mean, they should be bracing for a continued volatile president. I mean, we were talking about this before the break. We've been living in the volatility of Trump's mind right now, where he goes back and forth. I mean, this is like Groundhog Day, but the plot of the movie is threatening war crimes, right? I mean, he's back and forth. We're living the same news cycle over and over again. And if he thinks he can meaningfully erode Iran's willpower here, they have the ability to bear significantly more pain. Threatening the civilian infrastructure of a country that kills its own people, how is that going to move them, right? And right now, we're in this situation where all we've gotten was, like you said, we're going to get a more empowered IRGC if this continues, because they have a decentralized mosaic leadership structure where you have different generals that have different realms of their own responsibility here. You're not going to be able to take out the head like he thought. He thought he could take out Khamenei. He would be able to get a Venezuela-like situation, and instead he chopped off one head of a hydra. He's got a more extreme Iran. They now have the Strait of Hormuz as a choke point, the Houthis opening up another front in the Red Sea. The American people are bearing the costs. And like you talked about, every time there's a casualty over there, which Trump is apparently trying to erase, whether we know about these casualties, like we saw on the Pentagon website, is that the American people at home are seeing the cost to their pocketbooks. They're seeing the cost to human lives, our service members, and we're having a more robust response as a democracy that is going to be able to not outlast Iran's willpower. Like, if the war has to end, and Iran knows Trump's going to have to give.
Think about what these actions are doing. Think about how much they're eroding the military support Donald Trump has had since he stepped onto the scene in 2015. Ambassador, new but adjacent topic. I want to ask you about the condition of the nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia. After this thing became public, Trump then adds this massive new demand on social media, normalizing relations with with Israel, recognizing a Palestinian state in order to get this deal done. That ain't happening.
This is so crazy. I just step back for a minute. This is a pattern of how they make decisions in the Trump administration. There's no interagency process. The National Security Council doesn't meet. Secretary Rubio's national security advisor and half a dozen other jobs. So they roll this out. Doesn't sound like there was a discussion with the president. No explanation why they didn't sign the additional protocol. That's to give more inspections. I think that's a huge mistake, personally. And then the president finds out what's happening. He says, well, no, I want to change the deal. And I just think we're suffering from the consequences of this chaos. Same with the decision to invade Iran. Was there a big decision? Did they sit down? Did they talk about secondary consequences, tertiary consequences? It appears they didn't. And this is yet another case where it just appears that they didn't really talk about what they were doing. And now the president wants to clean it up. And there's one phrase that drives me nuts from this administration. After you see things like this, they all say, well, he's the guy. Deals is the only thing he knows how to do.
Part of the deal.
We don't have a deal on Iran. We have a messed up deal with Saudi Arabia. We don't have a deal with Russia and Ukraine. It turns out that maybe the way he did business in New York, part of the deal, but it doesn't work when it comes to foreign policy.
And he didn't even mention the Board of Peace, the situation in Gaza. And we still really don't have a clear picture of what the current status in Venezuela is. Here's the thing, though, Ron. Yeah. The president doesn't focus on diplomacy. I don't actually believe nuclear capabilities are a focus for him. However, this deal with Saudi Arabia is a 30-year, multi-billion-dollar deal. How much could both the United States and Saudi Arabia economically, or from a business perspective, not economically, because I don't mean the whole country, how much could they benefit from it?
Well, a lot. I mean, and there are a lot of the president's friends who are involved in the production of nuclear power plants, and those can be exported.
He's also not the first president who's entertained this idea.
No, the thing I'm more worried about, though, is this opens the door to a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. If Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia is going to get a nuclear weapon. The president says they can't enrich uranium. Well, you can't run a nuclear power plant without a certain amount of enriched uranium. If you use deuterium or heavy water, you can get around that. But what that does is it sets the stage for Israel having a nuclear weapon already, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Russia, France, the UK, the United States. I mean, we're setting up North Korea. We're setting up a situation that is extremely volatile. When you look down the road some years from now, this is, even if it's just at the moment perceived to be for civilian use, this could go off the rails, at least in my mind, and the ambassador may disagree with me, but it could go off the rails quite easily somewhere down the road.
Last word to you, Ambassador.
Correct. Of course, it could go off the road, off the rails. And I just get back to the fundamental point. What is in America's national interest in signing this? The president should explain when he does these things, because when he doesn't, then we have to relitigate them way down the road. And the most tragic decision, of course, is this one about Iran. But this is in a pattern that we've seen before.